On the 25th of August last month, Mark Logan, former COO of Skyscanner, published his review of the Scottish tech ecosystem commissioned by the Scottish Government, with recommendations on how to develop a world-class tech sector. And in his recommendations, Mark noted to establish a strategy to exploit Scotland's diaspora, where he said that our international diaspora should be tapped more actively as a strategic resource. And the general recommendation here was to assign Scottish Government responsibility for generating a comprehensive multi-year diaspora exploitation plan following Ireland's successful model. And he said that the strategy should take into account existing assets such as Global Scot and Scottish Business Network. And I'd love to say that this recommendation that Mark had planned was an introduction to today's session, but it wasn't. But it's a great introduction to one of the topics we're covering in today's session. Kingsley Aikins will be covering two key topics around networking and diaspora engagement, and why in this global economy significantly impacted by the COVID pandemic, both these issues are critical to business and economic development. And as Kingsley has said, networking is one of the key skills any of us can learn during our career, and it's also vital in our personal life. So before I hand over and do a quick intro to Kingsley, please use the chat function during Kingsley's presentation. I'll note the questions, and as you know, I'll bring you in during or post Kingsley's presentation to raise your question or any comments that you'd like to bring into today's discussion. So please keep the conversation going online using chat. So a short intro to Kingsley in Dublin, where this former Leinster rugby player has been in lockdown with his family. Kingsley is recognised as a global expert on networking and has written and spoken extensively on this topic, having run workshops and presentations from some of the world's leading companies such as Google, LinkedIn, Accenture, PwC, the list goes on, along with providing insight to global government organisations, including the UN and the World Bank. So why is this economics graduate from Trinity College Dublin, who's lived and worked in 6 countries, talking to us today about networking? Well, in all of these locations, Kingsley has found networking and building networks essential for making progress. And he developed his understanding of the benefit of networking and diaspora engagement during his time with my former employer, Irish Trade Board, now Enterprise Ireland, and IDA, when he was based out in Sydney. Kingsley then founded the Ireland Funds. For 17 years, he was based mostly in Boston. And in his time with the funds, over $250 million, yes, $250 million was raised for projects in Ireland. And I do hope that Kingsley today, in one of his various stories, but does tell you why year 2 of the Ireland Funds came about, because it is a good story to tell. Kingsley was awarded the CBE for his work on British and Irish issues, and I'm now delighted to hand over to Kingsley Aikins in Dublin. Kingsley.
Well, Christine, what can I say? That was way over the top. That was a hugely exaggerated introduction. But I have to admit, it was pretty much exactly the same as the one I emailed you last week. So I appreciate you getting that so spot on. This is the second time, actually, I'm speaking with the Scottish Business Network. If you remember, we did a great event in London where you reached out and you brought in the Danes and you brought in Northern Ireland, you brought in from us in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, etc. I thought it was a great event. But somebody then told me, they said, you know, you get invited twice to speak for the Scottish Business Network. First, he said, when your career is on the way up. And the second time is when your career is on the way down. So Christine, it's great to be back, and really terrific to have the opportunity of speaking to my computer and hopefully to a lot of other people. I've done over 50 Zooms now over the last, since lockdown. And somebody called me the other day a baby Zoomer. That was okay, that was quite funny, but then he went on to call me a Zimmer Zoomer, which I didn't think was quite the same level. But anyway, you know, here we are. Love to do stuff with Scotland. I have a sister in Scotland. She was over recently. I go over there a lot. I love my time there. I love the Rose Street run after the Murrayfield matches, all that kind of stuff. But also I think there's some real similarities just in terms of the size, the sum of the interests, and also in terms of our diaspora around the world. I've always met lots of Scots all around the world, and I think they're very innovative and creative in what they do. And then you see the influence in places like New Zealand and Hong Kong, Canada is really terrific. And it's great to see, and I've done some work in the past with great organizations like Global Scot and yourselves. So I think this is all great. So here's what I'm going to do, and I think time is kind of the essence, is to really dig into the glue that makes all of this kind of stuff work, which is networking. Go through some process on that, and then, you know, maybe do about 2/3 of the presentation, and then about 1/3 of the presentation on this whole area of diaspora engagement, which is just going through a fascinating period at the moment, partly because of what's happening. And one of the interesting little side effects of what is happening right now with COVID is there's a lot of people returning to countries that they were from. So emigration is becoming return migrations, particularly in places like New Zealand, like here in Ireland. We're having an influx of people who have spent time overseas and are coming back. And of course, they come back with experience, with resources, sometimes with money, but certainly a different way of looking and doing things. So that's really terrific. But first of all, you know, really sort of digging into this thing about networking. As Christine mentioned, I went to these countries with these organizations. I didn't know anybody when I arrived. And I knew that to survive and thrive, I'd have to build a network and kind of build it from scratch. And of course, what's interesting about networking is no, you don't get taught this stuff at school or college, and organizations generally don't even have strategies for networking, but everybody says it's really important. Whenever I run a session, I do a little poll and I ask people how important on a scale of 1 to 10 is networking for your life, for your career, for your personal life, and everybody says it's a 9 or 10. And then I ask, how good are you at it? And most people say, well, you know, I'm a 5 or a 6. And then I ask, have you ever done any training in it? And it's always 9 out of 10 says no. And would you like to do more training? And 9 out of 10 say yes. So it's obvious kind of where the gap is. And in a sense, networking is just a reflection of a core truth about business and kind of like life in general. It's about connections. It's a basic human desire for interpersonal connections. And without a network, your career tends to be capped. So you build a strong and diverse network, and that's important, the diverse piece. And you build that over time. And at times it seems really daunting. It feels like picking up grains of sand one at a time. But if you do it on a consistent basis, it actually becomes bucketfuls. And when you think about it, you have 5 opportunities every day to have a networking event. You can have a breakfast, lunch, dinner. You can have a cup of coffee during the day, a glass of wine after work. You know, 5 a day, 25 a week. I mean, it's 100 a month. That actually mounts up. If you just take 2 opportunities a week to really focus on doing some networking, actually that really, you know, comes up with over 100 connections in a year, and it begins to mount up. It's not about any one big thing. There's no one big transformative thing. Networking is about a lot of small things, which if you do on a daily basis, on a consistent basis, they become habits, and then they become rituals. They become kind of who you are and sort of like the way you live your life. And it also is a fact that a strong and diverse network is no longer a luxury. This is not a luxury. This is a necessity. And essentially, it's about 3 things. It's about changing your attitude to becoming relationship-driven rather than transaction-driven. It's about altering your behavior. And the hardest thing in life, and we all know it, is behavior change. Giving up smoking, drinking, taking exercise, losing weight, all those things are really, really hard. And we all desire to do them, but we all struggle to make achievements there. So it's changing attitude, altering behavior, and then it's really focusing on some key skills which we're kind of going to get to. But it does actually mean you have to take action. And as a fella says, you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You know, I can't do your press-ups, as a fella says. You have to take action, and that's the important thing. So that's kind of the intro of this thing. And of course, given what's going on now with COVID, people that ask the obvious question, well, how can I network? Can't network at all now. And COVID, this disruption that we've had, we don't know today what tomorrow will bring. The impossible has now become possible. The uncertain has become certain. So these are extraordinary things that we never could have imagined right back in February. But then don't forget, there was a lot of change happening anyway before COVID came along. And we were living in a world of what they call VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And actually, awful events in history, if you really look back at them, they tended to be followed by periods of great innovation, great creativity, in fact, great growth. I know when I was working in the United States, we lived through 9/11, where 22 of our people were actually their supporters in New York died in 9/11. And I remember the next day going into our office in Boston saying, I don't think we'll be able to exist as an organization. I don't think we'll be able to continue raising money for Ireland. Nobody in America is interested in what's going on in Ireland. They're concerned about what's going on in the US. And the following week, we were due to have this big 1,000-person dinner with a guy called Dan Rooney, who owned the Pittsburgh Steelers, in his stadium. We're going to have this major event. And I rang Dan and I said, well, of course, we're going to have to cancel this event. He said, no, we're not going to cancel it, but we are going to change it. He said, we're going to continue with this event. We're going to raise a lot of money, and we're going to give it all to the New York firemen. And that's what we did. And so from me and my naivety of thinking that we're going to scrap this and go nowhere, he just tweaked it and he changed it and he altered the focus and he turned it into the most extraordinary event we ever had in our history. And the following 2 years we went on, we actually soared as a result. So it's kind of an interesting notion of awful events can actually, with some reinterpretation, can change and be great. Somebody said to me the other day, imagine if you were born in the year 1900. Just imagine. When you were 14 years of age, there was a world war. When you were 18 years of age, there was a pandemic that killed 50 million people. When you were 29 years of age, the whole world economy collapsed. When you were 39 years of age, we were in the Second World War. So I guess what he was saying is, crises are happening and will happen. What we call these black swan events, which the writer Nassim Taleb wrote a book about black swan events, which are unexpected, which are rare, but they have really, really high impact. So the issue now is, we were facing incredible disruption and change before this happened. Technology and innovation were wiping out whole swathes of industry, whole swathes of employment levels. I remember hearing the head of Mercedes-Benz saying, change is happening now faster than ever before, but never will be as slow again. So digital transformation, wiping out whole areas of jobs. So what's the message in this? Change and handling change is the most important thing. It was, I think, Charles Darwin, the British anthropologist, who said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, it's not even the most intelligent, it's those most able to handle change. Or Peter Drucker, the American management consultant, said, to create the future, you have to be the enemy of today. Success in the past is no guarantee of success in the future. The strategies that got us here won't get us there. Business as usual is not an option. Somebody said to me the other day, if a company is doing a year from now exactly as what they were doing today, then they're not going to be around for very long. So there you have it, extraordinary notion of shifts and change. Somebody put it the other day that, if your grandparents were farmers, and I was thinking about my grandparents in the west of Ireland, yeah, they were farmers. And they said, your parents were probably gardeners. And my mum and dad created everything we ate in the garden in the city of Dublin. And then they said, and I bet you get takeaway. And of course, they were absolutely and utterly right. My dad left school at 14 and joined a company. And he left that company age 77. Well, those days have gone. The escalator model of a career where you work, join, get promoted, work, join, eventually work your way through to that gold clock. That's all kind of gone, dramatically changed. So why then is networking, why am I pushing this and why is it so important? Well, the harsh reality, I think, is that you can't go it alone. You have to network your way to success. The old Lone Ranger approach to life, the kind of the Marlboro Man, you against the world, it just doesn't work. And the reality is that a person who knows a lot of people has quite a different life from somebody who really knows nobody. So the myth of individualism, doing stuff and achieving stuff on your own, doesn't work. Opportunities don't float around on clouds. They're attached to people. So if you're looking for an opportunity, You're looking for people. And networking has lots of great sort of benefits that which are obvious. You know, it helps you get business and find customers and attract investors and find suppliers and gets good staff. All that's all good stuff. We like all that stuff. But what's interesting is that people who have strong and diverse networks live longer, certainly like that. They are stronger mentally and physically. They earn more money and they're happier. And all the research bears that out. And also networking is, I believe, an antidote to possibly the greatest crisis of our times, which is loneliness. And so having a strong and diverse network is important. Having a strong network is your way to escape your silo. We're all so focused. We're so busy being busy. Our heads are down all the time. We're in front of screens all the time. But having a network allows you get outside of that kind of echo chamber. And there's this issue of what we call homophily. Homophily is the tendency we all have to spend time with people just like us. When you think about it, and there's nothing wrong with it. You know, we were born to people like us. We go to school, we go to college, we play sports, we work with them, we marry them, we produce more of them. But actually, that's not what the world out there is like. The world out there is very diverse. So I live in a city, Dublin, which when I was growing up, essentially was male, pale and stale. It was not very diverse or cosmopolitan. Whereas now, here's some interesting statistics I saw the other day. 17% of the population of Ireland were not born in Ireland. It's 25% in Dublin. It's 33% of the working age population of Dublin were not born in Ireland. But here's the question. Does your network reflect the diversity of the economy you work in, the society you live in? And again, all the research by the McKinseys and the Bains and all these organizations say that if that's the case, then you underperform as a company, as an individual. So we do have to look at that issue. Frankly, networking is the way you're going to get your next job. As I said, those careers for life are over. People are going to be moving and changing job like never before. But they're going to find their job through their network. 80% of good jobs are not advertised. So you're going to need your network. In fact, there was some real seminal research in the US done by a guy called Granovetter, who said that actually your weak connections in your network are more important than your strong connections, because your weak connections bridge you into all sorts of different types of people in different places. So you got to work on building weak connections. And he said, that's where you'll get your job from. We also have a phenomenon now of what we call hire and wire. Companies want to hire people and wire into their networks. Companies want to hire well-connected people, because you see, we live in a world where it's not what you know, it's not even who you know, it's who knows you. So this is a new dynamic out there. When you're being interviewed for jobs, companies want to know about your qualifications, of course, they want to know about your work experience, of course, but they want to know who you know. So now it's important to become known. I say known, not famous. You don't have to become a Kardashian, but you do have to become known. So as I said, those careers now are very different. Millennials are not staying in companies, they're moving around. The vertical world of hierarchies has been replaced by a horizontal world of networks. And that whole traditional career structure is kind of gone. That kind of lifetime commitment to a company, lifetime loyalty, like my dad had, it all worked out very well. Things didn't change much in his life. He had the same sorts of networks, but now you need it, and that's really important. So this is why networking is important. But I have to say, and be honest about this, there are some real problems with networking. Most people hate it. You know, it's got a sleazy image. The word itself, you know, turns people off. The word network is more positive, but it does have that conjuring up images of people in a bar late at night flicking out business cards that are ferocious, right? Another problem is not taught, as mentioned earlier, at school or college. Companies don't have strategies for networking. People say, it's not my job. I wasn't hired to network. I was hired to do other stuff. So it's kind of not what I'm meant to do. It's not a KPI in companies. So people are not assessed, compensated, rewarded on it. It doesn't show up in the recruitment process. People mix it up with sociability. They think the most sociable person is the best networker. And here's what's interesting. Introverts can be better at networking than extroverts. Why? Because they do it with decency, authenticity, integrity, honesty. They're good people. They ask questions and they listen. The number one skill in networking. Many people don't realize that as their career progresses, the technical skills they needed to get their job in the first instance, important as they are, become less important, and relationships become more important. Many people miss to make that kind of transition. Many people don't ask themselves the brutal question, is my network good enough for where I want to be in 5 years' time? And here's another thing. One introduction, one conversation can change your life. It certainly happened to me on a number of occasions, just by meeting one person. It changed my life entirely, opened up an opportunity I never knew I could even existed. So that's important. But the thing is, networking is important, but it's not urgent. And we all live our lives doing really urgent things. So I'm a fan of a guy called Vilfredo Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian mathematician, economist, but he was also gardener. And he discovered one day, when he was harvesting his peas, that the vast majority of peas came from a small number of pods. And he, being a mathematician, he kind of really tried to put some numbers around this. And he found that about 80% of the peas came from about 20% of the pods. And he was an economist in Italy, and he decided, he was just wondering, does this apply, he said, I wonder, to kind of life in general? And he applied it to his work, because he was looking at the distribution of wealth in Italy. And he discovered that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people. And lots of other people began to look at this. And it became, of course, known as the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. In fact, you see it all the time. I was looking at one the other day. There have been 77 countries have played soccer in the World Cup. 3 countries have won 17 of the first 20 World Cups. So this led to the whole notion of the power of accumulative advantage. This notion that small little marginal increase in gains can have huge impacts. And that's why your network becomes important, because your network can be the difference maker. Your small little extra thing that you've got through your network, even though it's tiny, can have massive implications. I used to work, as Christine said, with the IDA. Our job was to bring inward investment into Ireland. If we came second in an inward investment deal, we got nothing, zero, nada. If we got first, we got everything. And sometimes the difference between first and second was absolutely tiny, minuscule, was just razor thin, but the implications are enormous. Being a little bit better can get you all the gains. Being a little bit worse can get you nothing. And that's why networks become really important. I'm also a fan of a guy called Harvey Coleman, who's an American management consultant who wrote a book about a thing called the pie theory. And he said your progress in life depends on 3 things. Your career progress depends on 3 things called PIE, P-I-E. And P stands for performance. And he said something outrageous. He said, how well you do your job contributes 10% to your career progress. Surely that's daft. Surely doing a great job is like 100%. He said, no. He said, doing a great job is the price of entry. It's the minimum required. It gets you on the pitch. He said it gets you on the ladder. It doesn't get you up the ladder. So this is really incredible, because nobody realizes that. Everybody thinks you got to do, it's got to be 90% of your career progress doing a fantastic job. He said, no, that's the mandatory. You got to do the I and the E of the pie theory. So the I, he said, this is 30% of career progress, and this depends on your image, who you are as an individual. What do people think of you? What's your reputation? Your reputation is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. You know, are you a positive kind of person? Do you bring solutions? Do you bring problems? And when people look at you, can they see you at the next level? Do you sound like a leader? Do you have strong executive vocal presence? You know, how do you come across, basically? That's your image. So that leaves E, which he says was 60%. And 60% of your career progress is exposure. Who knows you and what you do? Who's seen you in action? Who's seen you speak? What's your boss think of you? What's your boss's boss think of you? And what are you known for inside the organization, outside the organization? What would you be a go-to person for? You know, do you do visible work or do you do invisible work? So he said this was 60%. So this is incredible, this whole approach. Basically what he's saying is the parental advice that I got, I'm sure many of you got leaving college, for example, was my first job: work hard, keep your head down, and keep out of trouble. Really pretty bad career advice. Now, I'm a fan also of somebody called Carla Harris. Carla Harris was vice chairman of Morgan Stanley, 32 years on Wall Street, highest black American executive, female executive on Wall Street, wonderful character, fantastic TED Talks, YouTube videos, wonderful speaker, a gospel singer, really, really great. Great to listen to this woman communicate. And she says, you know, you need three things in your career. You need an advisor, somebody who'll help you technically with your job and work. You need a mentor. And a mentor is somebody who gives you the good, the bad, and the ugly. Could be in your company, but doesn't have to be. That's important too. But she said you need something else. You need a sponsor. And the reason you need a sponsor, she said, a sponsor doesn't just talk to you. A sponsor talks about you. And why is that important to be in your network? She said, because all major decisions about your career, whether it's compensation, whether it's promotion, whether it's the next project that's around, will be made in a room at which there will be a load of people sitting around a table, and you will not be in that room. And that's why, because she said there's two types of currency in your career. There's performance currency, how well you do your job, and that's really great and important. And then there's relationship currency. And she says performance currency, diminishing margin returns over time, relationship increasing margin return over time. So that becomes really, really important. So then that brings up this whole notion of your personal brand, and that everybody kind of thinks that career responsibility is somebody else's responsibility, but your personal brand, that's all about you. And there was a wonderful article written back in the 90s in Fast Forward magazine by that great American business consultant, Tom Peters, who said that, you are the CEO, the manager, you are the head of an organization called Me Inc. And Me Inc. Me Inc. is this new company that you're responsible for. It's all about you have to make a decision. You have to decide what's important. You have to take control of your own career. When you look in the mirror every day, you have to see the person who's going to decide what's going to happen with your career. You can no longer rely on other people. This brand called You Inc., based on that really simple premise. It's your life. If you don't shape it, somebody else will. And that becomes an interesting thing, because then you have to think about, what do you stand for? What value do you add to other people? How can you become a leading authority? How can you become known? How can you build expertise? All that kind of stuff becomes really, really important, that notion of Me Inc. Because successful people are successful brands, and everyone has a brand. You can't opt out. In fact, not having a personal brand is having a personal brand. And your personal brand is not what you say it is. It's what other people say it is. So the only question is, do you want to determine what your personal brand is? Or would you prefer other people to determine what it is? And if you let other people determine what your brand is, it's generally not the brand that you'd be all that keen on. So it's all about whether you want to be in the driving seat or in the passenger seat when it comes to creating this personal brand, which really boils down to figuring out what's true and authentic about you, and how can you find ways to let other people know. Because it's important for your career. It's important that you make those decisions. As they say, future leadership of your company will not be by unknown people. So you need to become known. And we mentioned a bit that earlier. And the number one skill in terms of networking, and if everything else is forgotten today, in many ways, this is the most important thing, is actually becoming a great listener. And the reality is, we live in a world where most people don't listen. Most people only listen to prepare what they're going to say next, not to hear what you're saying. Listening, for many people, they think it's a sign of weakness. They think that talking is a sign of power and control and being strong and being knowledgeable. The reality is, you learn nothing when you're speaking. You learn everything when you're listening. And when you're speaking, you're only repeating what you already know or what you've already recently read. So that becomes a really important thing. Many people are narcissistic listeners. So if I said to Christine, you know, I'm thinking of buying a car, and she said, I bought one last week. The guy wanted 15,000. I gave him 10,000. It's a supercar. I did a great deal. She's taken my topic and she's kind of hijacked it and turned into her topic. And I'm frankly not that interested. So some tips for listening is, you know, to become a really good conversationalist, you probably best to hardly say anything at all, to see silence as a form of activity, to listen carefully, not just to what is being said, but to what is going to be said next, to listen to what isn't being said, to watch out for body language, to pick up what people are saying through their not just through their words, but what their body's saying. So that becomes really important, the power of attention, as we say. And then another really important thing in networking is this notion of serendipity. Serendipity is random chance. And the question is, can you control, in other words, serendipity? Can you make luck, random chance happen for you? Or is it like a bolt of lightning from the blue? Is it just something that you've no control of? I think you can make random chance happen for you in a non-random way. Put it this way, it doesn't happen lying in bed, it doesn't happen sitting at your desk, it happens when you're in motion. It happens when you're out and about. It happens when you do stuff. It happens when you speak to strangers. It happens when you put your talents on display. I mean, we do have this issue of what we call stranger danger, which is, you know, you will not build a network of diversity unless you get comfortable talking to strangers. And yet many, many people fear that. In fact, we start off in life with our parents telling us, don't talk to strangers. But actually, statistically, we're at more danger from friends and family than we are from strangers. And so getting to be comfortable with these things, it becomes a really important way of helping break into this notion of funnels of serendipity, which can control our lives, which can influence it. One introduction, one conversation, as we said earlier, can have an extraordinary impact. But can you behave in certain ways that you increase the possibility, the probability of random chance happening? And of course you can. So what then are the characteristics of great networkers? They work hard at it. They're constantly working at it. They're humble. They don't brag. They don't keep score. They don't say, Christine, I did you a favor a few weeks ago. You owe me one. They think like farmers who plants a seed and waters, nurtures that seed, looks after it, knowing that there will be a harvest in the fall. And they understand that relationships are living, breathing things. And if you don't water them, if you don't nurture them, they die. So if you neglect them, they die. So you have to spend time and effort doing this stuff. Great networkers are curious. They ask lots of questions that begin with who, what, when, where, why, and how. They know there's two types of information in the world. There's formal information, and you can Google it, you can read reports, but formal information is available to everybody. You can't compete on what everybody knows. And there's informal information. That comes from your network. That comes from people telling you tips, hints, suggestions, making introductions. Referrals are the most important source of business. That comes from your network. So they keep their peripheral vision open, looking out all the time for opportunities. Great networkers are high tech. They totally understand the power that technology gives us, how cheap it is now to get in touch with people all over the world, but they're high touch as well. They get that balance right, and we live in a world where there's such a skewing now towards purely technology, but they remember that you need to have that high-tech side with going with high touch. And they do all this with honesty, decency, and integrity. They're good people, and that shows, and that comes out. So when we're doing our networking, there's really four really important things, this four-step process to this. But first of all, it's really important to remember three great questions anytime you meet anybody. And these questions are, you know, the first question, which is so powerful when you're developing your network and you're spending time with people, is what can I do for you? Because networking is all about giving, not getting. And if you think, what can I do for you? It's an incredibly powerful question. The second question is that if you were me, what would you do? In other words, you're saying, if you were in my position, what would you do? So you're paying respect and deference to wisdom and experience. you're listening, which is that wonderful, great skill, and you're getting some information from somebody. And then the great gold dust question in networking, which is, who do you know who? Who do you know who works in aircraft leasing? Who do you know who lives in Brisbane? So what you're really sort of saying is, are you willing to put your reputation on the line to make an introduction from me? So that, as I say, you can always go, instead of having cold calls, you can go to have hot coffees. Now, I've gone on a little bit longer than I wanted on that side, but I did want to spend just a few minutes on the networking, on the diaspora side, because that was what I spent most of my life doing. It was very much engaged with developing the networks of the Irish diaspora around the world. But also when I worked for IDA, the Industrial Development Authority, we had this notion of not just FDI, foreign direct investment, but DDI, diaspora direct investment. And we knew the diaspora, we used to call them tipping agents. They were people who could make introductions because they could help nudge a deal in our direction. Back to that life is a game of inches notion, the Marshall gains. We knew that these people could help us find the right people and could, in some cases, help make the introduction themselves. So I think that now countries are beginning to realize they have such a thing as diaspora capital. And we know that the Scottish Business Network knows this and Global Scot knows it. It's made up of three flows. Diaspora capital is three flows: flows of people, flows of knowledge, and flows of finance. And you can put in place strategies, and put in place policies and programs and projects to benefit from that. Ireland has always been doing this. As part of our constitution in 1937 was a recognition of our diaspora. And of course, we have a very large diaspora. We have a minister of the diaspora. We have the Irish Abroad Unit in the Department of Foreign Affairs. And it's quite an interesting policy approach because it's all about identifying the successful Irish around the world, but also supporting the vulnerable Irish around the world. So people who need help and need support, there's a budget from Dublin which is spent on helping these people, and some of them are in Scotland or in England or in the United States or Australia or wherever the great Irish groups went. And so it's really that, and also this notion of that there's the question of what's the role of government in all of this. And in Ireland it tends to be the government are seen as kind of facilitators for a lot of these initiatives. Some of them they fund, some of them they don't. But also they are facilitators rather than implementers. But what we're seeing now, and I've worked with over 30 countries, is that an actual explosion now of interest in how do you connect with your diasporas. In fact, just before I got on this call, I got contacted by Azerbaijan who want me to do a session in the United States for the Azerbaijani network of diaspora people over there. But the interesting thing about diaspora is telecommunications and technology has made these connections possible, which when they weren't so possible before. Now it's more important what you do than where you are. So people can be, who knows where they are? Who knows where people are listening to this today? So in the old days, your geography dictated your identity. If you lived in Southern California, that's who you were, that's what you did. But now we say geography is history. The interesting thing is that it opens up an interesting possibility for countries like Ireland and Scotland, particularly small countries. And I think particularly small countries right now in the world need their friends. They need their friends more than ever. We can't rely on the major powers anymore, just given what's going on. We need, as a small country, to really develop a very influential global footprint. And the Irish government, in their latest strategy, they're doubling our international presence through embassies and consulates and opening embassies in places like Colombia, Chile, New Zealand, various other countries, becomes very important. And they're seeing that there's a difference between the nation and the state. The state is kind of lines on the map, but the nation is a global notion. So now we've got this sense of, rather than being a tiny little island off an island in the west of Europe where it rains a lot, we see ourselves as one of the great tribes of the world with access and influence, and individuals, we call them A&I individuals, people of affluence and influence in all sorts of places around the world. And we're building these networks, back to that again, to connect with these people, engage with them, not necessarily just to ask them for stuff, because lots of diasporas feel the only time they hear from their home countries when they're looking for money, but actually to see how we can involve them, engage them in participating in this whole global notion. Countries who've done this well, obviously the best country in the world historically was Israel. China is very active in this space. And the one that I think is most interesting is probably India, because they had no diaspora strategy. up until about 2002. And then they did a big global survey of the diaspora. The Indians now are extraordinarily successful globally. They are the most successful ethnic group in the United States. Some of the great companies of the world, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Intels, these are run by Indian-born educated people. Indra Nooyi, an Indian woman, ran Pepsi for many years until recently. Indian-born educated, went to America for elite education, got engaged, joined Bain, the consultant group, joined a client company, Pepsi, then headed up Pepsi. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is that she was head of the US-India Business Council. So what we were seeing is overachievers, I used to call them these business rock stars in the United States, were connecting back to their country of heritage or affinity or birth. So you had the head of Coca-Cola's, Mukhtar Kent, and he was head of the US Turkish Business Council. Andrew Liveris, head of Dow Chemicals, was head of the US Greek Business Council. And there's a ton of examples of that going on. So now what we're seeing is what we sometimes call lost actors are becoming national assets. This now is a terrific resource for a country, a region, a place. Diaspora is not just about countries, it's about place. And so people can be very passionate about, in our case, we'd say very passionate about Cork, and they rather hope Dublin falls over. And people can be very passionate about Edinburgh, Glasgow, or Aberdeen, and not be interested in the other places. So it's about this notion of place. It's about a notion of belonging. And belonging is a very powerful, powerful instinct. So that then becomes important. So I do think that we're going to see a surge in interest around the world in this area. We think we use a horrible expression as we want to diasporize the world. We want to get the world to really buy into this kind of notion. The whole area of global philanthropy is fascinating. The area, because I was in that space. We found one individual in the United States called Chuck Feeney, who's an Irish-American, who was a disciple of a Scot, Andrew Carnegie, the great Scottish philanthropist, who really was the great-grandfather, father of philanthropy, who left Scotland at age 14 and went to America and made a fortune, but believed that it was the importance of wealth was actually to distribute it, and to distribute it while you're alive. He said, "He who dies thus rich dies disgraced." So this Scot influenced this Irish-American, Chuck Feeney, enormously. And Chuck Feeney has given away $8 billion, and he gave $2 billion to education in Ireland. We would not be where we are today without the diaspora philanthropy of one individual. So every country has to kind of find their Chuck Feeney. Christine, I'm conscious of using up time here, and I wanted to keep time for some Q&A. This was a 3-hour presentation, which I kind of lashed through at a bit of a rate of knots. There's lots more available on our website, and also lots of online training courses for anybody interested.
Thank you, Kingsley. I was keeping a close eye on everyone, and the engagement was there the whole time, as always. Just to confirm though, Kingsley, you are on the Networking Institute, and details can all be found there. There's some great tools and very practical insights into networking there, Kingsley. We've had a raft of questions picking up on the topics that you've discussed here. So first of all, I'm going to go up to Inverness, and I'm going to our friend Alison Wilson at University of Highlands and Islands, someone I know that you've a deal of engagement with there. So Alison, over to you about being COVID and an opportunity around networking.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Thanks, Kingsley. That was fantastic as ever. I think every time I listen to you, I think of my dyslexic daughter when I say this, who tells me that she hears something different in every conversation that she has that she might not necessarily see in the written word, and I definitely heard something different again today. I really loved what you said towards the end there, and I know I asked my question at the beginning, but it ties it back in about us both being and needing to have good friends. And I wonder what your thoughts are in this kind of current COVID situation where I think we're all sharing something regardless of where we are and which family we belong to, if you like. And in a time where relationships have proven really, really important to us, how do we hold on to that, and how do we take that forward into our sort of business and professional lives and building networks remotely and virtually and on camera like this and sitting with headphones on, how do we get into that room? What would your advice be?
Yeah, look, hi Alison, great question. And I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of zoomed out. You know, I've been doing this, and I can't wait to get back out, you know, to events, but I can't. And in fact, my business went to zero overnight. I had about 50,000 euros of business lined up in presentations, workshops. Everything was looking fine. It went to zero overnight. So, you know, you're left with very few options. But you have an interesting option, which is actually to embrace technology. And I'm not a techie person, but to embrace technology. And I think I always was a little anti-technology because I felt that it was kind of replacing individuals and people. And I thought it was, you know, there's a woman called Sherry Turkle's written a great book called Alone Together. She's saying we're spending all this time on connecting people all around the world, but we're all alone in front of a screen. But actually, I've been proven wrong. Technology has become a medium of intimacy over the last 6 months that none of us, I certainly didn't anticipate. So you know, I took a low tech approach and a high tech approach to the problem. Low tech is, as soon as this all happened, I wrote to 500 people. I mean, I emailed 500 people. I told them what we were doing. I then produced lots of stuff for free online. I, in a spirit of kind of, you know, sort of beneficence, I decided to give away a load of stuff. I did all that. I started doing webinars. Suddenly, I discovered a whole new network of people I never knew existed. I now, when I put stuff up, I'll get 10 or 15,000 people going on it. I'm having all these new connections and communications. So actually, it's been a net. It's been a plus. And I'm hoping that when we do get back, and we will go back. I mean, we will go back. It may take a year, but we will go back to where we were. It'll be an interesting hybrid, both in terms of how we work. I think there'll be a bit of hybrid home and away. And I think in terms of technology, I think it's actually been quite liberating in many ways, discovering all sorts of new people, new places. I never would have come across these people before. So I found a new tribe, an online tribe, which I didn't have before. And I'm hoping that that's in addition to what I've already got face to face.
Thank you. Thanks, Kingsley. So I'm over now to Karen Somerville at the Angels Share. Karen, I know you were wanting to ask just about the totality of networking. Karen, over to you.
Yeah, hi Kingsley, thank you for that. That was great. And just really my question was around what you said about when you're networking, what I can do for you rather than, you know, what you can do for me kind of thing. And there's a phrase that always gets used and my staff hate it, and I use it quite a lot, is reaching out. And I try reach out to people in terms of how my business could just assist them and help them. And do you think that's part of the networking kind of phrase or system? I don't know how to say it really. That the reaching out part is quite important in networking.
Yeah, look, I think it's part of you creating a brand and a name and a reputation for being a generous person. So it means in terms of, you know, it's creating an ecosystem around you that we live in a world where it's very much me, and, you know, how can I get something from you, etc. And when you live your life in a different way, when you say it's about giving, it's about thinking, how can I add some value to somebody? How can I send somebody an article and say, listen, I'm not looking for anything. During lockdown, I ring a couple of people nearly every day, a couple of people that I used to know in the past, what I would call dormant connections, people that I have no connection with, and then I just ring people that I haven't seen, and I'm not looking for anything. I'm just ringing to say hi and have a chat. And I think it's quite interesting. Edelman did some research. Edelman, the great global communications company, they did some research, and they found in a load of different countries, the consumers are watching companies very carefully during this lockdown, during this period, to see what companies are really behaving in a kind of societally responsible way. And that they were saying in this research, individuals, consumers will punish companies who are not doing the right thing. I see it locally here with a particular chain that took a particular action vis-a-vis their employees, and I suspect that the public are going to punish them for doing that. It was a very unacceptable thing they did. But yeah, so I think that it is partly a way of living your life, sort of person that you are, but also, you know, in life, the more you give, the more you get. In other words, if you give to individuals, guess what? It kind of comes back from the network. Not quite sure how or where or when, but just does. And I think it's you're ahead if you do that.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Karen. So continue reaching out, I think, is the message there. I'm now going to call over to somebody who also runs a networking group, our friend Bart. Bart and Claire Alexandra down in Cape Town, they've been having a discussion around cultural aspects of networking. So Bart, over to you.
With all those Zoom events, obviously we are kind of busy. But Kingsley, very good insights. Very quickly, I'm Polish, living in Scotland for 15 years. I feel part of this community, and I've been dragged into the Scottish Business Network by Russell, and I love to support the networking, the connections. Obviously, I work with loads of Polish and Scottish UK businesses. And there is a question, obviously, of cultural aspects. From my own territory, I work with businesses who want to enter the UK market. They've got different mindset with networking. They completely understand differently. You mentioned about the Azerbaijan. You work with Azerbaijan businesses to talk about the aspects about how to communicate. What I want to ask you, your personal experience, but also with work with diverse communities around the world, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, maybe some funny stories. Thank you.
Well, you go online and you can read lots of stuff. I mean, I've now worked with sort of 30 countries around the world, and I've worked with cities. I mean, I worked last year with Copenhagen. Copenhagen is not a poor, African country. It's a very rich, sophisticated, but they have a problem. There's 300,000 people have left Copenhagen, and they live all around the world. So they want to connect with them. They see them as a resource. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, I actually met with the South African ambassador here in Dublin the other day just to talk about South Africa. South Africa is a large diaspora who have gone to Australia, gone to the UK, gone to America. I've also ran a training session 2 weeks ago for Lesotho. And their diaspora is in South Africa. So there's all sorts of different connections going on, and in different ways. I'm also a fan of this notion as nobody started a large organization. I mean, I think Christine alluded to at the beginning. I mean, when we started the Ireland Funds, we ran a black tie fundraising dinner in New York, the Great and the Good, and the dinner was so unsuccessful. The only reason we had a second dinner a year later was to pay for the first dinner, because we lost so much money on it. It was a disaster. And, and like so many things in life, we had a very inspiring person whose idea was to set up this organization, and he drove it. And so many things in life depend on inspiring individuals. As the guy says, have you ever seen a monument to a committee? But it was this individual who ran this, a guy called Tony O'Reilly. He was a great rugby player. He was a great everything. And I remember at that first dinner, we were modeled on the UJA, the United Jewish Appeal. I'm a founder member of a group called CASE, which stands for Copy and Steal Everything. In other words, find out who's doing something really well and see can it work for us. So we've copied Scotland. We copied Scotland a few years ago because you had the homecoming and we then had the gathering. So we just totally took your idea and tried to implement it in Ireland. So at that first dinner in New York, Tony said, we're modeled on the UJA, which is the United Jewish Appeal, who raised billions in the United States to support academics and education in all sorts of things in Israel. And we had a slogan, peace, culture, charity. And he said, we're going to change it to look Irish, dress British, think Yiddish. If we could do those three things, we might have something going for us. And of course, he was right. And when you look at, Apple Computer started in a garage, Hewlett and Packard in a shed, Amazon in somebody's front room, Starbucks in somebody's back door, everybody starts at zero. That's why it's exciting for what you're doing in Scotland and the Scottish Business Network. I mean, all these things have to start at zero and then just grow from there.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to bring in Graham McWilliam up in Aberdeen to ask a question I think we'd all like answered. So Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Kingsley, that was first class. I almost ran out of space on my page on my iPad. I was typing so fast, writing it all down, so well done. So much to learn from that. It's great. My question was really around, we all know the networking events that we're comfortable with, and of course Scottish Business Network is one of these that we all miss the face-to-face element of, and desperately get back to. But more importantly, how do you decide which events not to attend, because we've all been there, and I think within 10, 15, 20 minutes or so, we're thinking of other things we could be doing rather than being committed to a room for an hour or so. Is there a secret there, or is it just suck it and see? And
yeah, you actually died on me there in the middle of that, but so I may not be answering the right question, but let me make a comment, and then if I haven't answered, come back to me. I mean, I was with somebody the other day, and they said, you know what, we're not going to go back to the Chamber of Commerce dinner where there's 1,500 people in a black tie at a big ballroom. We're not going to do that anymore, because what happens is it's so big, we know nobody, and we all sit around together, the staff, and we talk to each other. There's no point in spending $3,000 to go to a dinner where the staff talk to each other. And so we're not going to do that anymore. But we're finding in this Zoom world, we're actually building really better and stronger relationships. People are accessible because they're not going anywhere. They're around, so they can get to people. So I think we'll end up with a bit of a hybrid. But I think that model of 1,000 people in a room may be a bit dated when we go back. We may not jump back into it. I think we'll be nervous as well for health reasons for quite a while. But I may have missed one of your points, your question.
no, I think that covered a good part of it. It was just to which events to avoid, and how do you know? Do you stay the course for an hour or so, or do you politely leave the room?
And of course, we all lose the sale on the eve of the sale, So that the minute you leave that room, you missed out on an opportunity. I always say that your name tag at one of these events is a permission device to talk to strangers, because there's a guy called Andy Lapata who wrote a book in England called "And Death Came Third," and he said there was 3 great fears in life. Death was third. Second is walking into a room where you know nobody, and we all hate that. And the greatest fear in life, as you probably know, is public speaking. But we all hate going into a room where we know nobody. I mean, we just shy away from it. So finding devices and ways that you have somebody with you or you have contacts so you can zero in on people that obviously, otherwise I shy away from going into a room I know nobody.
Yep.
Thank you, Kingsley and Graham. We've got a couple of questions. I'm just really conscious of time here, so hopefully, folks, I will not go much over an additional 5 minutes, but I can tell there's a lot of engagement and comment going on in chat, so I'll keep a couple of questions here. I'm going over to Simon in Edinburgh regarding questions, Simon, you were wanting to raise with Kingsley about connections.
Yeah, thank you, Kingsley. I just wanted to echo what we've already said with regards to thank you for your time, very valuable, clearly very passionate, and it certainly fired me up yet again about the power of the diaspora. My question is hopefully quite a quick one. Just with regards to gaining new connections, is it more valuable in your view to be referred a new connection by your network or to make it directly? And I think it was quite interesting because I put that question down, and then you started talking about personal brand and the importance of controlling that. So that might play into that somehow. Yeah,
look, I mean, obviously, if you can get an introduction, it's like it's like a passport control at the border. If somebody has vetted you, somebody's willing to put their reputation on the line and basically say you should talk to this person. I mean, it is just fantastic. It's the perfect thing because you have a warm introduction. Terrific. I think I said, never have cold calls, always have hot coffees. And sometimes it's not possible, but finding some way that somebody will make an introduction for you rather than just going in cold. Because when you go in cold, everybody thinks you're trying to sell them something, and you probably are. but it's just so much easier and so much better. And then it's the multiplier effect. It's your name and reputation to the power of the introduction, and that's so much better.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. 2 final questions, and I'm going to go over to one of the Irish diaspora, Donna, who's sitting there. I think you're still in Ayrshire there, Donna. You were bringing up a question around procurement and relationships and networking. Do you want to come in there, Donna?
Thanks, Christine and Kingsley. To echo everyone else, that's fantastic. I've written about 8 pages of notes here. I'm an Irishman. Dropped in Scotland. I'm an Irishman in the Scottish Business Network, a natural networking background in the family who've moved all over the world. But what our business is all about, making connections and networking. So it's natural. But what I found in my world is procurement have put a big wall in the way of the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't go near the relationship, because you have to get over that wall, and then you can build the relationship. And it's really flatlined our business. So we've plateaued because I'm trying to find a way around the wordsmithing required in order to get that relationship back up and running. And I don't know if you've come across that in your networking, but it's great to see the diaspora is working, and when it works, it's magic. But that wall is something that we're finding really difficult to get over.
Look, I have not heard that particular issue raised, although it kind of makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and I can understand. You got to be whiter than white, cleaner than clean. You cannot be seen to be in any way finagling through, connections and somehow or other, either sort of elongated nepotism or something, something in there. So I've not come across that particularly as an issue. And I think there's probably, you can go up to that wall, but you can't go over it. So, all I could suggest is if there's other ways you can use, which is in terms of getting advice, and getting suggestions and getting, people giving you some color commentary on what the issue is about. But once you cross that line, you'll get penalized, or get rejected if you're seen to be misbehaving. And I suppose it's their effort to have a level playing field for everybody. So just because somebody knows somebody. But I'm sure there's subtle ways of gaining information that probably don't see the light of day or go into print.
It's like being an underdog. We're not giving up, but we're trying to find ways around it, over it, and crashing through it. All types of. We just haven't found our way through that yet. It's something that I've shared with others. But if there is a solution, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Maybe not a solution, Donna, but I wouldn't be doing my job in Scottish Business Network if I didn't refer you to one of our members, Andrew Morrison. I think David Gray's on the call as well from AMBID, who do phenomenal work providing insights into how to be more effective around the procurement model. And as always, I'm happy to make that introduction, Donna.
Thank you. Yes, I'll commend Andrew's webinars recently. Thank you very much, Kingsley. The networking's been brilliant.
Well, always leaving people smiling, as you have done, Kingsley. I'm going to have the final question from Poonam, because Poonam just asked you to explain a wee bit more about that failure in some ways of the first event. Poonam, do you want to come in with the final question here this afternoon?
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Christine, and thanks, Kingsley. It's interesting talk, and you've given nuggets of information. And I don't want to pin you against the wall, but it was just that during the discussion you mentioned it was a spectacular failure. So I think one of the greatest thing about spectacular failure is spectacular learning. And you did have the courage to go back and organize the second event. So I just was puzzled to see why it failed so miserably, and then what could have been done differently, and what did you learn about it? So your further nuggets.
Well, it's one of those apocryphal story that kind of loosely based on fiction, which is slid into the undergrowth, but it was part and parcel of our, of the DNA of our organization was this famous first dinner. And somebody, frankly, I think somebody ran off with some of the proceeds. But anyway, economically, commercially, financially, it was not a success. But that didn't really matter because it was the idea that worked and the concept that worked. And in fact, we probably made more money subsequently telling that story than we did raising money on that night. But I suppose in a way, it's more that notion that nobody started a large organization. Ours was a disaster. That organization today is in 30 cities around the world. When that dinner is held in New York, in one night, they make $4 million. So it's wonderful to see, how you can grow these things. And it's all about just the quality and the caliber of the people, the passion and the engagement that they have. But it's all this notion of, if you were to be rational about it, you would have, after the first dinner, you wouldn't have had a second dinner. You have said, this is failure. We're not going to do anymore. So actually it worked. And life is partly about failure, but it's how you respond and react to it. And our people were brave enough to go ahead and sort of swallow the loss and say, we're going to do it again. and guess what? You know, it worked. And now there's 40,000 people a year go to the events around the world, and it started at zero. I just love that. I love the messaging that comes from that. But Christine, I was just thinking, you know, maybe my Irish friend there, Donna, the definition of a gentleman in Scotland is somebody who knows how to play the bagpipes but doesn't.
Yeah. Yes. Nicely done, Kingsley. Ladies and gentlemen, if we were all together in the room, I know that Kingsley would get a rousing round of applause. So we'll give you that virtually, Kingsley. Another wonderful, insightful session. And as Alison Wilson says, no matter how many times I hear you, Kingsley, I'm still scribbling down hundreds of notes. So thank you so much, Kingsley. Just a virtual round of applause there. As you said yourself, that it's about the quality and the calibre of the speakers, and we could not have greater quality or greater calibre than yourself, Kingsley, and we're extremely grateful to have you on the board of advisors from, well done, Dawn, I'm liking your smiles there. Extremely delighted to have you on our board of advisors. I'm going to not immediately get everybody out of this call because there's some messages, and please take a wee time to look in the chat function of people who've really taken the advice of Kingsley on board immediately and have put up calendars and are open to connecting. So that's what Scottish Business Network is all about. It's about making these connections that wouldn't otherwise have happened. And while we're all missing the physical events, these are an opportunity to connect. So I want to immediately close down today's session. Please take a wee while to look at the chat function. Just 2 points to make. Scottish International Week, 28th of September to the 3rd of October. Be a pleasure to see you at some of our online sessions there, and also to say Kingsley Aikins sessions and will be recorded, and we'll put that up in our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you've missed, don't hesitate to go back. Kingsley of the Networking Institute, is an absolute joy as always, and to each and every one who've taken the time out of your busy Zoom days, thank you for taking the time. I look forward to connecting with you all again, and as to all of us, stay safe and stay well. Take care. Bye-bye.